I'm Susan Yawkey with VOA's Middle East Monitor. Coming up, U.S. troops leave Iraq with job concerns.
I feel like I've done enough, and I want to go back to the civilian world. But right now, it's not looking too good for me.
The Syrian uprising divides Syrians in the Golan Heights. A look at the Nour Party of Egypt. And dozens of states pledge to improve the plight of refugees. It's all ahead on The Voice of America. In a few days, the U.S. military will end its presence in Iraq after almost 9 years. American soldiers and Iraqis view the withdrawal with a mixture of emotions. Sharon Bain reports from Camp Adder near the southern Iraqi town of Nasiriyah.
By the end of the year, American flags will be lowered in this base in southern Iraq. It will mark the end of almost 9 years of American military presence in Iraq. Command Sergeant Major Butler Kendrick Jr. of the 20th Engineer Brigade was one of the first into Iraq in the initial invasion of 2003. He served multiple tours and returned again this year, making him one of the last to leave. He's anticipating a new life at home.
Forward to spending time with my daughter and my wife, and just being able to enjoy the simple things in life.
But Sergeant Major Kendrick is taking some hard memories home with him, too. The loss of his company commander, Major James Ahern, 4 years ago, killed by a bomb in the summer of 2007, is something he cannot forget.
He was hit with an IED, and I wasn't on the patrol with him. And that's who, out of all the fallen comrades, that's the one that I remember the most, because he was my battle buddy.
More than 4,400 Americans died in Iraq. Many more were injured. The U.S. says it was a fight to replace a dictatorship with a democracy. General Jeffrey Buchanan says there has been progress, but the future is now up to the Iraqis.
As somebody who served here for many of those 8 years, it's been very inspirational to watch the progress. But at the same time, I never forget the cost and the sacrifice. I think that the Iraqi people now have a tremendous set of opportunities that they never had before. But and my greatest hope is that they take advantage of the opportunities that they have.
Some Iraqis are not so sure the U.S. invasion that left tens of thousands of Iraqis dead was worth the cost. Heba Hisham's older sister was one of the ones who died.
It doesn't matter how tough life was before Saddam or before the war, but I think, was it worth, killing that many people? Was it worth young people dying? I don't think it was worth it. I really, really don't.
8.5 years of war has left deep scars on the Americans who served and the Iraqis who endured it. Sharon Bain, VOA News, Baghdad.
For American troops leaving Iraq this month, there is a sense of relief, but also worry about returning to civilian life and searching for jobs in a weak U.S. economy. VOA Pentagon correspondent Luis Ramirez is embedded with U.S. troops along the Iraq-Kuwait border, where thousands have been transiting on their way home and wondering about their future.
Staff Sergeant Brett Bolton is an Air Force truck driver who has served for 6 years. He is now looking at life beyond his deployment in the Iraq War.
First thing would be just to get a secure job, and then I'd like to start a family, me and my wife.
Jobs in the trucking industry at home are scarce. Staying in the military may not be an option either. Bolton is with the 387th Expeditionary Logistics Squadron, a unit created for this war. Clearing troops and equipment from Iraq is the squadron's last mission before it is permanently deactivated. Most members will go back to military jobs in the U.S., but their futures are uncertain in the face of coming defense cuts. For many troops, the joy of going home is tempered by worries about finding a job.
Right now, the unemployment rates nationwide are just through the roof. I've done my 6 years, and I feel like I've done enough, and I want to go back to the civilian world. But right now, it's not looking too good for me, so.
The Air Force and other branches of the U.S. military have programs to help troops prepare for their job hunts and find ways to apply their wartime skills in civilian settings. The troops' battle now is to start new lives in a troubled economy at home. They have sacrificed for their country, and they hope their country will now deliver to them. Luis Ramirez, VOA News, on the Kuwait-Iraq border.
Iranian state television has released images of what it says is a U.S. unmanned reconnaissance drone. The drone was downed Sunday along Iran's eastern border after it made a brief incursion into Iranian airspace. Iran says the drone was brought down through a cyber attack and was landed with minimal damage. U.S. officials have acknowledged the drone's loss and described the incident as a major setback to the stealth drone program. They said there are real fears that the Iranians will share the drone technology with China or some other country, but also expressed doubts the Iranians have the expertise to recover any surveillance data from the aircraft. Ron Huskin is a senior fellow at the Strategic Studies and Defense Center at the Australian National University, who tells VOA's Victor Beattie, if true, the downing of the RQ-170 Sentinel would be a significant development on many levels.
It has political ramifications because the alleged origin of the drone was in a neighboring country, not the United States, obviously, so a third party was used to launch it, political complications there. The more specific things of interest is what the Iranians may be able to learn about the capabilities of the drone that they didn't know before, who they might share that information with, several possibilities there, whether they're skillful enough in themselves to, in a sense, deduct the nature of the sensors on board the drone and how good they are, or enter into a deal with a country with more skills in that area and will share the machinery with you in return for you sharing the intelligence that you derive from it on its capabilities. Obviously, in this area in particular, the optimum situation is to have your opponent know that you have him under surveillance, but he has no clear idea on how it's being done, how sensitive the surveillance is, whether it's day and night and all weather and so on. If you can keep that under wraps, you get the maximum payoff. You both learn a great deal, and the opponent doesn't quite know the best way of minimizing the capacity of your drone to pick up intelligence. If what's transpired has transpired, then clearly the Iranians will be better able to adapt the way they do business inside Iran to evade detection by these capabilities.
You know, we've read so much about the success of these drones in targeting terrorists in Pakistan, where U.S. forces, of course, cannot go because of territorial issues. But obviously, advanced technology like this, one of the big flaws of it is that it can, in fact, be captured.
Anything made by man a certain percentage will fail. One of the more ominous speculations about this particular incident is that Iran somehow intercepted the command and control signal between the operators and the device. That would have sort of wider significance, if you like, that if countries could learn how to do that, then the ways of operating these things would have to be very substantially revised.
Will this set back U.S. and Western efforts to monitor Iran's nuclear program?
Not necessarily. If, as I say, the United States attaches pretty much unrivaled priority, if you like, to keeping in touch with Iran's nuclear activities, the fact that one or two drones are lost wouldn't preclude continuing to use them. It's only if you begin to suspect that the Iranians have made some kind of breakthrough that makes them predictably vulnerable, then obviously you pull them back and change the technology in some way or change your rules of procedure or rules of operating to make it, again, a chance event rather than something that the Iranians can pull off whenever they wish.
Ron Huskin, a senior fellow at the Strategic Studies and Defense Center at the Australian National University. The confrontation is growing bloodier in Syria between forces loyal to President Bashar al-Assad and supporters of a 9-month uprising against his government. The strife is also causing divisions among Syrians in the Golan Heights, which has been under Israeli control since the 1967 war. VOA's Scott Bob reports from the Golan town of Majd al-Shams.
Majd al-Shams, the main town of the occupied Golan Heights. Some residents are debating the situation in Syria, their home country. Shop owner Hussein Jamil says terrorists are behind the 9-month-old uprising and they will not succeed.
All the people in Golan Heights have the same opinion. So we are supporting Mr. President Assad, and we're thinking what's going in Syria, it's a conspiracy.
Most of the 10,000 Syrians living in this area are Druze, who traditionally have supported the 41-year-old regime of President Bashar al-Assad and his late father, Hafez al-Assad. But the rift in Syrian society is now causing differences here. Jamil's neighbor, Hussam Ayeb.
I believe that as president, he should not be in power more than 5 or 10 years. The state does not belong to him, so he cannot rule for 50, 40 years. There are people who are better qualified than him and can govern better.
92-year-old Sheikh Hassan Bashir says all that Syrians want is a peaceful resolution to the confrontation.
We're in too much pain. This is not in our interest, or the interest of the Jews, or America, or France, or Britain, not even Russia, nobody. This is very damaging.
The uprising has left an estimated 4,500 people dead and is fueling tensions in the region. Turkey, Syria's northern neighbor, has called for a buffer zone to protect dissidents from pro-Assad forces. Israel this past week held military exercises in the Golan. Syria has also held exercises, firing rockets into its eastern desert. Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak called it a display of Syrian bravado.
It is an event that takes place more out of fear and distress than from confidence. The Assad family is losing its grip. Bashar al-Assad's fate is sealed. He will fall.
The Arab League has suspended Syria and is imposing sanctions. Pharmacist Gandhi Kahluni, a fervent Assad supporter, is angry at the Arab response.
The governments are collaborators, but the Arab people are still alive. At the end of the day, the Arab truth will win against those oppressors, those cowards.
Human rights activist Salman Fakhraldin says Syrians now are discussing politics and human rights, which they were afraid to do before. But he acknowledges the situation is unsettling the community.
The main problem in this small place, in the occupied Golan, is to keep the peaceful life of the community. Politics can be changed, but the community will not change it.
Syrians living in occupied Golan are in a delicate position. Their country is still officially at war with Israel. As a result, the conflict in Syria heightens their uncertainties and adds to their distress. Scott Bobb, VOA News, Majd al-Shams, occupied Golan Heights.
While it has been expected that the Muslim Brotherhood would do well in the Egyptian parliamentary elections, being the most organized opposition group, a new party representing strict Islamist groups surprised Egyptian voters, coming in second place. Joining me is VOA's Mohammed El-Shanawi, who spoke with the leader of that party. Hi, Mohammed.
Hi.
Hey, Mohammed, can you tell us about the party and how it emerged?
Actually, it's called a Nour Party, which means the Party of Light. It was officially registered as a new political party in June of this year, with a platform calling for a constitutional Egypt with an Islamic reference. Its members and followers are fundamental Islamists called Salafis, which means following the early Islamic practices with a strict interpretation of Islamic laws called Sharia. It appealed to some Egyptians who insist that there is no separation between religion and politics. This party gained about 25% of the vote in the first round of the parliamentary elections, thanks to their depiction as the guardians of Islamic law, and it's headed now by Ahmad Abdel Ghafour.
As you spoke with him, what was his explanation of the sudden rise of Salafis?
He said that while they gained 1/4 of the vote in the first round, that could be even higher in the two remaining rounds because the party, as he said, is filing popular candidates who reflect a desire among lots of Egyptians to follow Sharia as a way of life and not as just a mere stipulation in the constitution. However, he emphasized that the Salafis are not calling for a theocratic state where religious scholars are ruling by God's right. All they are seeking, as he said, is a constitutional modern state in Egypt that's run by an elected president who will rule according to the Islamic law. According to Al-Nour Party, if the majority of Egyptians wanted to apply the criminal law of Sharia, then it should be applied as it has been followed in Saudi Arabia.
How about the Christian minority of Copts in Egypt who fear that such a strict brand of Islamists might limit their freedoms and rights?
He acknowledged their fears, but was quick to say that Islam guarantees equal rights for members of other faith in the community, and thus Copts will even enjoy more rights than under the rule of Hosni Mubarak, President Mubarak, who stayed in power for 30 years. That's if Islamists were in the majority in the parliament. He also said women's rights will be boosted and they will be encouraged to be more active in politics and also in all walks of life.
Yeah, well, Israel expressed some concern that Egypt, under an Islamist majority, may go a different direction when it comes to the peace treaty. How did Nour Party address this concern?
The leader of the party told me in the interview that their platform calls for relations with other countries to be based on mutual respect and common interests. So for Israel, the party is backing peace with Israel and would preserve the peace treaty. But, he said, if there are some sections of the treaty that were not honored so far, it should be honored now.
The first task that the new parliament would be asked to do is selecting a commission to draft the new constitution of Egypt. How would that be impacted by an apparent majority of Islamists?
That's the most important issue that's consuming all Egyptians' debate right now. Ghafour insisted that the elected members of the parliament are the only legitimate selectors of that commission. However, the Supreme Command of the Armed Forces, CAF, who has been ruling Egypt after the revolution, has just formed an advisory council of a wide spectrum of political forces to help drafting the election laws for the new president and the selection of majority of the Constitution Committee in order to avoid an eventual Islamist constitution. Muslim Brotherhood, which came number 1 in the first round and was known for its political pragmatism, pulled out of that council, and the uphill battle will be coming soon between the parliament from one side and SCAF on the other side in a matter of weeks.
Well, thank you very much, Mohammed.
Thanks.
That's VOA reporter Mohammed El-Shinawi in our Washington studios. The United Nations Refugee Agency reports 60 states attending a 2-day ministerial conference have pledged to improve protection and assistance for millions of forcibly displaced and stateless people. Lisa Schlein reports representatives of almost 150 countries were present at the conference in Geneva, making it the largest ever held on refugee and stateless people in the UNHCR 60-year history.
The conference was called to bolster international support for the 1951 UN Refugee Convention, which has literally saved the lives of millions of people fleeing war and persecution, and the 1961 Convention on the Reduction of Statelessness. UN High Commissioner for Refugees Antonio Guterres says the conference was absolutely necessary because of the enormous increase in the number of refugees this year. Since the beginning of the year, he says 750,000 people have crossed international borders in search of protection. Much of this exodus was due to the uprisings in the Middle East and North Africa. As more refugees are being generated, Guterres says more than 7 million people are living in protracted refugee situations. He says they continue to live in exile with little hope for a normal life because few durable solutions are available for them.
At the same time, we are facing a serious economic and financial crisis in many parts of the world. And we are witnessing, in many public opinions, signals of anxiety, of insecurity, sometimes of fear in relation to the future. And that generates also feelings of xenophobia that here and there threaten the protection of refugees and stateless people.
The UN Refugee Agency reports there are 43.7 million refugees, asylum seekers, and people displaced internally by conflict around the world. In addition, another 12 million stateless people are all but forgotten and are denied access to basic services such as health and education. High Commissioner Guterres says he is encouraged by the outcome of the conference. In fact, he says he never expected this meeting to go as far as it did. He says he is surprised by what has been achieved.
Not only there was a large consensus on reaffirming and strengthening the protection of refugees and stateless people, but there were concrete pledges made by states and other international organizations in relation to the improvement of the protection regime of both refugees and stateless people.
Guterres cites several examples. He notes 20 countries have announced plans to improve their legislation for the protection of refugees. 19 have presented proposals to integrate refugees into their societies. And 18 have promised to improve access to resettlement. In addition, he says 7 new countries have ratified the 1961 Statelessness Convention, and 20 others have said they will follow suit in the near future. He says these pledges will significantly strengthen the convention, which until now has been ratified by only 37 countries. Lisa Schlein for VOA News, Geneva.
U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has urged software and other high-tech firms not to sell technology that would help repressive governments restrict Internet freedoms. In an address in the Netherlands, she also warned against the imposition of national barriers to the Internet. VOA's David Gallist reports from the State Department.
Clinton says there are some cases where the repressive use of products cannot be foreseen by high-tech companies, but she says in others it can, and that private firms need to embrace their role in protecting Internet freedom and avoid offering authoritarian regimes in the Middle East and elsewhere the tools of repression.
Today's news stories are about companies selling the hardware and software of repression to authoritarian governments. When companies sell surveillance equipment to the security agency of Syria or Iran, or in past times Gaddafi, there can be no doubt it will be used to violate rights.
Clinton was the keynote speaker at a 23-nation Dutch-sponsored conference at The Hague that is to launch a coalition of countries working with companies and civil society groups to advance Internet freedom. Dutch Foreign Minister Uri Rosenthal said it is vital that technology developed in democratic countries not become complicit in human rights abuses.
I say it clearly and loudly here. Export of certain technologies to certain countries must simply be prohibited if we know that they will be used to limit freedoms. We are worried about a proliferation of Internet filter technologies reaching repressive environments. As a government, it is our responsibility to prevent that.
Clinton, ending a 5-day European trip, also warned of efforts by authoritarian states to use global organizations to impose national barriers to the Internet, replacing the loose public-private partnership that now governs it.
If we're not careful, governments could upend the current Internet governance framework in a quest to increase their own control. Some governments use Internet governance issues as a cover for pushing an agenda that would justify restricting human rights online. We must be wary of such agendas and united in our shared conviction that human rights apply online.
Clinton did not specify countries having such an agenda, but aides say she was referring to, among other things, a proposed code of conduct for information security introduced at the UN General Assembly earlier this year by Russia, China, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. The Secretary of State said governments erecting barriers to Internet freedom will eventually face a dictator's dilemma, having to resort to greater repression to keep the barriers standing and missing out on the benefits of blocked ideas and disappeared individuals. David Gallist, VOA News, the State Department.
This show wraps up another week of VOA's Middle East Monitor. Our reporters, Cecily Hillary, Mohammed El Shanawi, David Arnold, and David Bird. Our social media team, Yuri Hiltaichuk, Momo Hutton, and Jessica Stahl. Our director, Patrice Martin. Our managing editor, David Hutchins. Senior editor, Bob Morris. And all of our technicians and engineers here and around the world that make the show possible. I'm Susan Yockey, and thanks for tuning in to Middle East Monitor.
For more on the stories you've heard on our radio programs, visit our website at voanews.com. That's where you'll find in-depth reports, related stories, videos, and more from our team of correspondents. Or take the news with you by downloading podcasts of your favorite VOA program. That's at voanews.com. Online news for a changing world.